My name is Brian Corrie. I'm the co-lead for the Common Repository Working Group. And my partner in crime is Artur Roca from Adc in Portugal. And I'm going to walk you through what we've been up to over the last year and a half. So our goal and mission is basically to promote basically the sharing of AIRR-seq data. And we do that through working through the AIR standards and implementing what we call the AIR Data Commons API, which I'll talk about in a bit. And the goal of that is to create a network of repositories that we call the AIR Data Commons. And one of our big missions is, and a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last little while, is around sharing information about the community to the community and growing the use of the AIR Data Commons. So we have a fairly big group in terms of our email list. There's a core group that's been fairly active from the kind of community meetings. This is the kind of the list that have the people that have given permission to share their names. Our email list is actually quite extensive, so there's a lot of people that are interested in this, but there is a core set of group that is kind of active every day. So this is our plans from the 2020 proposal. And a lot of it, the two main things that we're really concerned about is outreach to the community to grow the AIR Data Commons and evolve the standards for the Adc Api, which is the API we use to query those repositories. I'm going to talk about, just going to touch on each of these very, very briefly. So one of the things that the the Common Repo Working Group came up with at the very beginning was a set of recommendations, and we maintain those recommendations over time. There's not really very much that has changed over the last 18 months. A couple of minor things in recommendation 12 and recommendation 14. These are all on the GitHub repository for the AIR community. If people are interested in looking at them, please feel free to do that and comment if you'd want to recommend some changes. So there's nothing really too exciting there other than our kind of ongoing maintenance, and we will continue to do that moving forward. And one of the big things that we focus on is, of course, the Adc Api. The Adc Api is what enables researchers, people in the community to query these AIR Data Commons repositories. This is fundamentally depends on the standards that are developed through the AIR Standards group, and that group's going to talk a little bit later. And the plan from the AIR Standards perspective, I'm not going to talk about this very much, is that there's a new release of the AIR Standard that's coming out, and the standards groups will talk about that in more detail. And what we do is we basically key releases on the API to query the AIR Data Commons to match those standards. And so when new objects are released in terms of the AIR standards, the Adc API allows queries of those, and the repositories store them. So in version 1.1 of the AIR Data Commons and the earlier releases of the standards, there's essentially repertoires, which is repertoire metadata about studies and rearrangements. We have a much richer set of objects in the AIR Data or in the AIR standards now. So we have clones, cells, expression data, and receptors. And so all of those objects are implemented in the AIR Data Commons API version 1.2 release. So one of the big things that we've been focusing on is growing the AIR Data Commons. For those of you who are familiar, there have been, as of December 2020, the last meeting, 3 repositories. iReceptor a COVID-19 repository. We talked quite a bit about COVID last year. We're at the 2020 meeting, the iReceptor Public Archive, and then Lindsay's group at UTSW has the VDJ server repository. One of the really exciting things, we have 4 new international repositories that have been added over the last 18 months. So there's a group, Guriari's group at Barland in Israel, Christian Buss's group at DKFZ in Germany, Catherine Schieper's group at NICD in South Africa, and Nicholas Schwab's group at the University of Munster in Germany all have AIR Data Commons repositories with their own data in it available for querying as part of the AIR Data Commons. And the other big thing is, so we were about 4 billion rearrangements in 2020. We're up to over 5 billion annotated rearrangements. From over 84 studies in the AIR Data Commons in the moment. One of the big reasons for that is Lindsay's group at UTSW with Scott Chrisley they basically added about 1 billion rearrangements. So they basically added a quarter of the entire Irritated Commons from a year ago in one fell swoop. So they've added a whole bunch of data. So that's really, really exciting. So the Irritated Commons, so one of the things is, well, what are people doing with it? So I wanted to make it clear that there's a lot of activity going on. I talked a bit about this at the December meeting, but when we had the COVID data was made available in kind of May, June, July of 2020, our usage took off. So this bar graph is basically the number of users that are added to the AIRR-C gateway. So for those who don't know, the AIRR-C gateway is a web portal that queries the Adc Api. So I'm using stats from that as a proxy for use of the Irritated Commons because it's probably the best one that we have. So this is the number of new users per month that are added to the AIRR-C gateway. So we've had a big spike when COVID and the COVID data was available, but we've had a very, very consistent large number of users, over 20 users on average probably per month requesting accounts in the gateway. And those users are from all over the world. We've got large North American, European, Asian contingent, and a fairly big industry contingent. So we have a fair number of commercial users as well. And so one of the big questions, of course, is around impact. And one of the really interesting things, I think a lot of this was driven by COVID, but there have been probably on the order of 25 citations of the AIRR-C gateway / the Irritated Commons in the immunology literature over the last probably 2 years. So again, and those are references or citations for either storing and curating data in the Irritated Commons, or I think more importantly from the Common Repository Working Group's goals, is people are citing it as a place where they're finding data and they're reusing that data. And so that's, I think that's really the mission of the Common Repo Working Group. And so we're pretty excited about that. So one of the goals we had that we didn't do much on, so we did a fair bit on the other stuff, but we didn't do anything on the outreach to journals and funders. So one of the things we think important is for people to share and curate data. Funders have to encourage people when they publish their data or publish their papers. So we haven't really done much work on that. We're still quite interested in this, but I don't think it's something that Common Repo Group is really interested in leading at this time. So if other working groups are interested, we'd be happy to work with them. Another thing that has been on our books for quite some time, but we haven't gotten anywhere. So right now it's quite hard to find the repositories that are, I have to give credit to Lindsay and Scott, I think, for this, the pirate guy. That was from, I don't know, many meetings ago, and I loved it, so I kept it. They snuck it into one of my presentations actually without me knowing, which I thought was clever. So basically, discovery for AIRR-C repositories and where the data is challenging. And so one of the things that we've are working towards is getting a registry for such repositories. Right now, it's manual. They're documented on a website, or the AIRR-C gateway has an internal one, but other people outside can't use it. So that's something that's pretty high on the priority list for this year, I think, and we'll try to tick that off the list this time. We were also proposing to do a manuscript during this time period. We didn't do that, but we did publish a data sharing and reuse in that methods book that others talked about. So that's should be out any day now. And we worked with, of course, some other working groups on some of the other chapters. From our kind of proposal for leadership, both Artur and I volunteered to continue. Nobody else was jumping up and down to volunteer to lead. So we're proposing that our leadership continues as today. And that's about it. So again, the big picture is continue to focus on promoting and advancing the Irritated Commons, advancing the standard specs with other working groups. And I guess we're looking for endorsement for our plans, continuation of the working group, our recommended leadership. And the big thing for us, I think, is the release of the Adc Api version 1.2, which is going to have all of these feature capabilities that we're very excited about. And we're very open to others joining us. So if you are interested in in helping out and contributing, please email this email address. I will stop there. Yeah, any questions? Yep. Yeah. 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 Yeah, so that's a kind of repository specific thing. So one of the plans that we're working on is what we call an asynchronous download capability that will allow you to basically request a download. It'll notify when it's done, and then you can just download it through a link. That would take away that iterative process for those kinds of things. Not all of the repositories have that limitation. So yeah, so there's a solution that's kind of on the roadmap. I suspect that's probably pretty soon. Yeah. So there's a cell, there's a cell, an expression. Oh, where to go? Where is it? Yeah. So there's the new APIs are there's a clone object in the AIRR-spec. There's a cell object in the AIRR-spec. There's an expression object in the AIRR-spec, and there's a receptor object in the AIRR-spec. I think the standards group's going to talk a little bit more about that, I suspect. And so typically when a new object appears in the spec, we want to implement a query API for that because that data is going to be in the repository. And so we have query APIs for clone cells, expressions, and receptors. And those are pretty advanced in terms of implementation and things like that. So you can expect to see some data sets with cells and expression data in them in the near future. Yep. Yeah. So there's a couple things. So there's, I probably can't get into this, and the standards group might be able to talk about this in a little bit more detail. But so there's a mechanism for the receptor object. There's a mechanism to link to other objects with known specificity, like so you can link to things like an IDB and things like that. Yeah. So and I'll maybe let Jason, I think, talking for standards, talk about that because he will be more knowledgeable than I.